Hey everybody, Riot Mort here, and tomorrow is PBE of a new set, Teamfight Tactics Monsters Attack. And today I'll be running you through a lot of the changes you can expect, a lot of the new stuff to look forward to, what you can look forward to on PBE, and how you can help us out as we test it to get it ready for launch. So yeah, it's a lot of exciting stuff, and I can't wait to jump into it. Before we start, want to give a shout out. Big thing to note here is even though I'm the one presenting it, this is not my work. This is a team's work. This is a bunch of people's work, from our set lead Linda and the rest of the designers like Chloe and Noemi and Julian and everybody else, all the way to our production team, to our engineering team, to our artists, to our QA, everybody involved, to our marketing team who helped put this all together, everything. This is a big team effort. So if you see any rioters who have helped work on TFT, make sure you tell them thank you for all the hard work they've done. This is a lot of effort gone into this to make this hopefully the best set yet. So just remember that as we run through this. And yeah, cool. All right, so let's dive in. Monsters Attack. Got that heroes versus villains, monsters kind of thing going on here. And let's jump into the origins and traits you can expect. So, first one we're going to talk about is Anima Squad. Anima Squad is a trait where basically the idea is they can build fame every time they get a kill, which will give them a permanent 5 health bonus for the team. They also gain some attack damage and ability power. So basically, if you can get these guys in early and have them start getting takedowns, the whole team can stack a lot of health. And so late game, you can end up with like a 5-piece bonus that's 40% AD and AP, as well as something like, 600, 700 extra HP for the team. Can make them pretty strong if you can get them early. And we'll talk about their carries a little later. This is also one of the buildable spatulas. This is a very powerful emblem if you can build it. If you think about that, a single item giving you 40 AD, 40% AP, and 600 health is a very powerful emblem. So if you're managed to get a spatula and a rod, consider that and put that on some champions. Can do some really cool stuff. All right, Laser Core. This is a really interesting one. When Laser Core agent attacks or is hit by an opponent, their little drone, they all have drones flying by their side. It's pretty cool looking actually. Can attack the target. And so what's really cool is that then if the Laser Core agent dies, their drone is actually passed by. So you can actually end up in a late game fight. Let's say you're running 6 Laser Core. You can have a Zed that's got like 5 or 6 drones behind him, all proccing and doing a ton of damage. So it's kind of like a really interesting take on that like last alive thing. But also it's just very good early to get those bonus procs. So you can run it as a 3-piece, get some of those 50 damage procs, a 6-piece if you can get it early. And again, this is another buildable one, so you can consider that. This is one of the key verticals of the set with all those project skins. But really exciting here is if you can manage to get the 9-piece, which requires, level 9 and 2 buildable emblems, not only does the damage go up, but they each get 2 drones. It actually looks really cool, just lasers and drones flying everywhere. So if you're a big fan of verticals, this is a pretty fun one. All right, Gadgetine. Gadgetine is probably one of my favorite early game options. And then if you happen to hit an emblem with it or an augment, you can play it really vertically, which is really fun. But basically the way it works is at the start of every turn, they generate an item. It's a temporary item. It only lasts 1 turn, but it's a more powerful version of some of the items you've known to grow and love. So for example, you might get a more powerful version of Shroud that not only applies the Mana Reave, but also applies an attack speed slow for a few seconds. Or you might get a more powerful version of RFC that not only gives even more attack speed, but has like 40% extra, or 3 extra range. And so it's really cool because every turn that item then goes away and you get a new one. And so every turn you're sitting there playing with their little gadgets, their little items they've made. And basically if you just throw this in early, you're basically up a full, almost not quite radiant item, but a very full powerful item every turn. And if you manage to run the 5-piece, you get 2 of these every turn. So pretty fun trait. And like I said, you can get it pretty early with the Lulu, Poppy, and Annie, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, Gadgetine's one of my favorite openers personally. All right, Star Guardian. Star Guardian is back. Another big vertical. It's got 8. It's the biggest vertical in the game. But you can actually run it as 3, 5, 7, or 9. And basically all it does is it increases mana generation from all sources. This includes taking damage, dealing damage, items, any other passives from things like Civilian, which we'll talk about later. So you can get them generating a lot of mana. Pretty typical to run like a 7 Star Guardian vertical with something like a Talia carry and Echo as a tank. And that Talia will be casting like crazy, doing a ton of damage. This is also, you know, a really fun one you can pull off. There are emblems. It's not buildable, but there are emblems if you want to run this. And yeah, I think if you're a fan of Star Guardian, this is one of those pretty good verticals to get into. Grab the Lux, the Rel, the Yumi, and then slowly build from there. And then they have the capstone of Syndra, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, Star Guardian, pretty basic vertical of just get more mana, cast more spells. A lot of cool stuff there. All right, Civilian. This is an interesting one. Kind of a different take on something like maybe Scholar you've seen before. But basically the idea is if there is a single civilian alive, your team is inspired to protect them, gaining mana every 2 seconds. So for example, if you run Sivir in the backline and you protect that Sivir, your team's gaining an extra 2 mana per 2 seconds. If you're willing to run all 3 of them, you can get up to 7 mana per 2 seconds, so extra mana generation. And again, remember, this stacks with Star Guardian. So for example, you could run 7 Star Guardian plus a Janna, keep that Janna alive. You're going to be generating 4 mana every 2 seconds. So again, really cool way to protect the civilians and get that extra bonus. All right, Underground. This is a crazy one. Underground is our new take on our big, fun economy trait. But the idea here is if you're running 3 Underground, and you definitely want to get this in early if you can, every round you win, you will crack 1 vault lock, and every round you lose, you'll crack 3 locks. Once you crack 9 locks, you will be presented with a vault reward. At which point, this might be something like, let's say, an item component and 7 gold. You can look at this and say, I'll take that, moving on, or you can push further. And as you push further, the rewards get bigger and bigger. For example, maybe your second heist might be 3 item components and a Reforger. And you can push all the way down to the 7th heist. It is really hard to get 7 heist. Good luck with that. But stuff like, you know, Radiant items, Ornn items, some other surprises I won't spoil. But yeah, good luck. And yeah, if you can get 5 Underground, that's when you can really start cracking a lot of locks. But yeah, pretty fun trait. Definitely try it out. See what kind of rewards you can get. If you're ever a big fan of Fortune and Mercenary, this is probably the trait for you. Push your luck as far as you can go to get the biggest payout possible. All right, Ox Force. Ox Force is another interesting vertical that you can run as like a 2-piece, or, you know, try to go vertical here with the 6. And it is a buildable emblem. Pretty powerful buildable emblem too, because the way it works is just as a baseline, as long as you're running 2 of them, they'll become invincible for 1.5 seconds instead of dying. So this will save them from any big, you know, final attack. And then if they can heal up, you know, they can keep going. It won't trigger again or anything like that, but they can really save themselves. They can also absorb some pretty big spells because they're basically invulnerable in this state. So that's powerful enough as a 2-piece, but then as you go up, you get even more and more attack speed. And the attack speed scales, much like Slayer did in Fates, where the attack speed scales the lower the health they are. So for example, let's say you've got a Aphelios who's at like, you know, half health with 6 Ox Force, you're gaining like 135% attack speed, which is pretty powerful. And again, it just protects them from those big AoE magic bursts, things like that. So pretty cool vertical, and like I said, great splash. And again, that emblem is just kind of like a built-in mini GA, if you will. Doesn't drop aggro though, that's the one thing to note, but also gives attack speed, so pretty cool. All right, Mecha Prime. This is our new twist on the mech. This is a pretty interesting one, but basically you need at least 3 to get going. And what happens is, at the start of combat, your Prime that you'll designate, and I'll show you how real quick, will combine with the 2 nearest mecha, absorbing 120% of their base health. So it's just base health. You can't scale it with things like Warmogs or anything like that. You'll gain their health, and then if you have the 3-piece in, the Prime will also gain 60 ability power and 75% attack damage. Now that's base attack damage from their own. If you have a 5-piece in, you'll still only absorb 2 other mechs, but let's say you're running Mech Jax that's absorbing Draven and Wukong with Set and Leona on the side. The Set and Leona will also gain 40 ability power and 50 attack damage, and the Prime gains double that for 80 AP and 100% attack damage. So you can make a pretty strong mech with support units, or just the strong mech as a 3-piece. And so to give you an idea what that looks like here, it doesn't matter the distance, it'll just take the 2 closest, and you get a very clear indicator, which is really kind of nice. There's the prime selector on your bench, much like Dragonmancer before that. But yeah, you can decide who you want to be the prime, and go from there. And yes, there is an emblem. It's not buildable, but if you ever want to make some other characters a mech, give it a try. The one I like for memes is if you make Galio a mech and give him 2 Titans Resolves, you get the world's biggest chicken. But yeah, so Mecha Prime is a new twist. Hopefully still gives you that fantasy of creating a big mech. Yes, you can put items on the Prime, so you're going to get that big champion with whatever items you think feels right. Should be a ton of fun to make the best Prime you can figure out. All right, threats. We're going to be talking a lot about threats because threats are a big part of the game now. There are 8 threats, 3 3 costs, 3 4 costs, 2 5 costs. And threats are unique in that they don't have traits. Their trait is threat that does nothing. It's not really a trait. It's a trait in that it counts for like built different, so you can't run built different threats. But it's just, that's it. You splash them in, they do their thing. Now, what's nice is a bunch of them have special properties that make them unique. For example, Rammus has very high armor, where Cho'Gath has high magic resist, each with their own properties, so definitely check them out. But these are the units that are really good to splash into your endgame comps, or maybe you get like an early Rammus out of a box and he can be your frontline for a while. His damage also scales off armor. We'll talk more about that later. But yeah, threats are just this cool new really just trait that isn't a trait. So really like these units for splashing. Check it out. On the opposite end, we have supers. So if you like rerolling at all, supers are going to be your jam. This is probably my personal favorite reroll comp we've ever created. Because unlike most reroll comps we've made in the past, like say Yordle, where you just buy all the Yordles and that's your comp, supers works with a bunch of other comps. For example, we already talked about Gadgettine. You can roll supers Gadgettine, or you can roll supers Duelist, which we'll talk about. Like, it pairs with a bunch of other comps. And the way it works is just by putting in the 3 supers, your team gets an additional 20% damage. Your whole team, not just the supers. So that alone, you could just play it early and go fast 8 from there and then take them out. But each 3-star that you have on your team increases that bonus by 6%. So let's say, for example, you have 5 3-stars on your team, aka a reroll comp. The supers bonus is giving your team plus 50% damage. That's really strong for a 3-piece bonus. And so like I said, you can pair that up, reroll to your heart's content, and make that golden team that you've always looking for. Supers is a really fun variation on that. Let me know what versions of supers you enjoy. I expect supers Duelist and supers Gadgettine to be popular, but there's a few other ones in there, so give them a try. All right, admin. Probably our most complicated trait to date, but hopefully in a fun way. Admin is different and unique and custom every game. As you can see here, it just says when you put in your 2-piece, you'll be able to initialize your admin cause and effect. If you put in 4-piece, you'll get a secondary effect. And then if 6-piece, which is hard because it does require 2 emblems, though it is buildable, you'll increase those bonuses by 160%, which is pretty cool. So what does this mean? Well, what happens is when you put in the 2-piece, you'll be offered this first view here. The first one here that says you'll see 3, and there are basically like 40, 45 combinations here. So every game it's different, and it's unique per player. It is not the same per player. So what you get will be different than what someone else gets. So for example, this game, you can see here I was offered at the start of combat, my admins gain 35 AP. On ability cast, my admins gain 12 permanent health. Really cool for stacking HP. Or every 5 seconds, admins gain 20% attack speed. So a ramping buff. And I get to choose. It's my choice. So this game, maybe I choose combat start, 35 AP for my admins. Really good for a LeBlanc comp. Okay. Then I put in the 4-piece. What happens is you'll get a second one. Now, the cause stays the same. So because I chose combat start, this is saying at combat start, do I want a 50% chance to drop gold? Or do I want my admins to gain 35% health shield? So like an Exile's shield. Or do I want them to permanently gain 50 HP every round? pretty interesting. And so you can see here in this example, I chose the 50 max HP. And so now by running 4 admin, I'm getting, at the start of combat, admins gain 35 AP and 50 permanent HP for the rest of the game. So pretty cool. Now the thing to note is with the permanent HP, you have to keep admin in. You can't like stack a bunch of HP and then take admin out. Doesn't work. That's the bonus. But you can stack this pretty high if you think about it. You know, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. You know, that's 15 rounds. That's an extra 750 health. That's pretty good. So, like I said, there's like 40, 45 different combinations, each with their own tunings and values. But kind of fun to check out. And like I said, you only need 2 to at least double check and see if you're interested in it. There's some pretty fun ones in there. One thing to note is the % chance to drop gold can only appear at 4-piece. You can't get it early at 2, so no admin openers. But if you manage to high roll maybe a 4 admin opener, who knows? Maybe you can pull something off. So give this trade a try. It's definitely one of the harder ones, but if you can pull it off, there's some cool, unique things you can do. All right, on to classes. That's all the origins. Not a ton of origins this time because of the uniqueness and the threats and things like that. So let's jump into classes. Defender is a new take on the armor buff that we've seen before. But it kind of uses that same bruiser paradigm we've been getting pretty used to, which is kind of nice. So first off, defenders at the start of combat will taunt. It's always nice. They can just taunt, get aggro, attack me. That's kind of their job. Then in addition, they give their team bonus armor, but themselves more. So for example, you run 2 defender, your team gets 30 armor, and the defenders get 60 armor. Cool. We've seen this paradigm before. Really good splash. I recommend 2 defender in a lot of endgame comps. That extra 30 armor is a lot of extra survivability. I think you'll be seeing a lot of Riven and Set. Riven and Set are pretty good to splash in comps. Riven especially, we'll talk about later because she has 3 traits. But yeah, definitely 2 defender, really good in the late game. All right, Spellslinger. This is a fun one. I really like what the team did with this one. So Spellslinger, they gain AP. It's our one of our AP comps. Cool, they gain AP. Easy cheesy. In addition, every 5 seconds, the next attack, their next basic attack, instead fires a magic orb at a random target that explodes for 80% of the ability power's magic damage. So, for example, let's say you have a 250 AP Talia. Every 5 seconds, she'll go, boom, I hit you for 200 damage. So, again, if you've got like 4 or 6 of these, there's a bunch of meteors flying around doing a bunch of bonus damage. So pretty cool. I'm a big fan of this one. Definitely if you want your traditional AP comp, you're probably going to be running at least 2 Spellslinger, maybe 4. We'll see. Okay, Recon. This is an interesting one, and especially with the interactions with crit, which we'll talk about later. But first off, Recon innately plus 2 hex range. And I want to call that out because if you can manage to get a Recon emblem, it's very good. It's basically like the old Swiftshot emblem. You're going to get plus 2 attack range, so pretty cool. The other thing it does is if there's an enemy nearby, now for this you do need 2-piece in, the Recon units will dash to safety before casting their ability, so they can actually move and get away. It's pretty cool to see on like Kaisa and Vayne especially, but there's some other combinations. And then in addition, they have, at 2-piece they gain some crit chance, at 3-piece they gain even more crit chance, and if you're willing to run 4 Recon, you basically get 100% crit rate, and your abilities can crit. And this is important. We'll talk about why in the item stuff. But basically, built-in Jeweled Gauntlet, which is really powerful for a lot of these champions. And then you can just focus on full damage. So 4 Recon, if you can pull it off, a lot of bonus power there. Cool stuff. All right, Renegade. This is an interesting one. It's a 3/6, but there's only 5 champions, and it requires a 5 cost and an emblem to get 6. But this is a lot of damage. So the way it works is at 3-piece, your Renegades just get plus 30% damage. Pretty cool. But if all the other Renegades are dead, so let's say you're running Silas, Talon, and Viego, and Silas and Talon die, Viego gets an additional 30% damage. So 60% damage for a 3-piece bonus, that's a lot of power. So really good if you can get that in there. Now, the crazy thing is, if you can get, like, all 6 Renegade, and then the last thing left is a Viego, who's now getting plus 120% damage, whew, you can do some wild stuff with Renegade Emblem. It's a buildable emblem too, so definitely check that out. Good way to make some tanks do some damage. But yeah, Renegade's all about that last man standing, do some big damage. All right, Mascot. This is a pretty silly one. I like Mascot. The way it works is it's a team-wide healing buff for mascots, where every 3 seconds, your team will heal 1.5% of their max HP, and the mascots will heal double that, so 3%. Every time a mascot dies, what you'll see is instead of them disappearing, they actually run off to the side and they start cheering. So if you're running like 6 mascot, you end up with this like cheering section on the side, which is really cute. And each mascot cheering on the side increases this number an additional 1%. So say, for example, you're running 6 mascot and all 6 mascots have died, you're now getting a 10.5% healing every 3 seconds on your team. So you can have like a final carry go. So really good in the early game when combats are a little slower. Vertical wise, if you can get some good tank items, you can get some really high effective health with this. But yeah, kind of a cool take on the healing thing here. All right, Prankster. This is an interesting one. It only applies to a few champions, but I'm a big fan of Echo plus Zoe, personally. And basically what it says is once per combat, when they drop to half health, instead, they'll just basically, kind of like Edge of Night, they'll drop aggro, spawn a target dummy, so now the enemy is attacking a target dummy, and they'll move to a safe location and restore 500 health. So it's basically one get out of jail free card. If you're willing to run all 3 of them, or maybe you got like a Prankster emblem, you can and also stun the enemy that kills the target dummies. So you get like a built-in team stun, which is kind of nice. So just a fun little class there. Brawlers. So Brawlers are back, but with a twist. Normally, I think you're all used to Brawlers being flat health. They're not flat this time. They are percent max health. This does scale with items. So a really good opener is a 2 or 4 Brawler opener with a Warmogs. That Warmogs is going to be giving you 1300 HP if you're running 4 Brawler. Very good stuff. You can get some big HP totals this time. There's even like reroll Brawler comps where you can get 4 Brawler on your 3 stars, giving you a lot of value. But this also means 4 Brawler early with all 1 stars isn't going to be as impactful as it was before. You're going to need to invest in these Brawlers to really get the maximum amount of that damage. So definitely consider that. But there's a lot of good Brawlers in this set, especially for building frontline. Like I said, you're going to see a lot of Ribbon, Sejuani, which we'll talk about. But yeah, you expect to see a lot of 2 and 4 piece Brawler comps. And if you, like I said, if you want to go 8, you can get all the way up to almost double health. So pretty crazy. All right, Heart. Yes, there is an augment that is called Heart. Enjoy that. When your Heart units cast their ability, the team gains stacking ability power for the rest of combat. So, for example, if you're running 2 Heart with, say, Lulu and Yumi, Lulu casts her spell, your team has 5 AP. Your Lulu casts again, your team has 10 AP. So not only when you have more Heart champions are you getting more AP per proc, but you're getting more procs. And so if you go 6 Heart, you can stack a lot of AP very quickly. And yes, Heart is an emblem. So if you can find Heart on like a low mana user, like say a Zoe, you can stack that even quicker and do some pretty cool stuff here. Yeah, it's a lot of stacking AP. It does take a while to stack up though. So up against duelists, they're not going to be as good. But if you can get something like, let's say you're up against a Defender Aegis comp, you can build that up pretty quickly. All right, Hacker. Hacker's a fun one. So there are only 3 hackers, and by putting in Hacker, you gain Omnivamp. Pretty simple. But in addition, if you have at least 2 Hacker, you will get a Hackerim, basically a Trojan horse Hackerim, that appears on your board with a clear spot to like get inside. And at the start of combat, that Hackerim will charge to the back line and drop off their target. So really common thing here is you're going to put Zed in that Hackerim with, say, an Edge of Night. Zed's going to go into the back line, get on their important carries, and do a ton of damage. So while there are no assassins this set, you can definitely send one person back there to do some harm. I personally like sending tanks back there. If you're going to run like 2 Hacker and then throw back like an Echo or a Sejuani, you can do some pretty crazy stuff in the back line too. So consider that. All right, Aegis. Aegis is the magic resist version of Defender. They basically both work the same way. Aegis is a little more flex. Instead of being 2-4-6, it's 2-3-4-5. But basically works the same way. Magic resist for your team, double for the Aegis. And again, Echo is a really good tank. Alistar's got 3 traits, which we'll talk about. Leona's just good. So I expect to see, you know, again, late game, 2 Defender, 2 Aegis flex stuff going on. You'll see a lot of that. All right, Sure Shot. Sure Shot is basically the quintessential AD comp. If you built early AD items, you're probably going Sure Shot in the late game. You're probably going Senna holding your items for Aphelios, or you're going to have Samira be your carry and then use Aphelios as support when you get it instead of Senna. Or if you want to go real deep, you can go 4. But basically the way these work is just every 4 seconds, they increase their AD. That's it. So their AD can get big and big and big. But obviously all 4 of these champions use AD very well. All their spells are AD based. So very good. And Samira is just a very good champion. Her traits, which we'll talk about later, just make her a really flexible AD carry in the endgame. Like I said, I fully expect to see a lot of Samira plus Aphelios. That's 2 Sure Shot. And then build frontline around that. Very flexible endgame AD. So, speaking of Samira's traits, one of her other ones is called Ace. This is kind of like Ninja, if you remember it. You can either have 1 ace or 4 aces. And basically what it does is it's built-in execute. So Samira, by herself as an example, will execute enemies under 10% health. Pretty cool. It's like built-in collector, except no coins. But if you're willing to run all 4, your enemy team basically has 25% less health. I think 4 ace is incredibly powerful. It's hard to pull off, but if you can get like an emblem, and yes, there is an ace emblem, and then you can play like Misfortune, Samira, Mordekaiser +1, whew, you can do a lot of executions here. So pretty cool trait, and it just makes Draven, Misfortune, Samira, and Mordekaiser unique in their own right in that they lower the enemy team's essentially total health. So, and finally, the last class, Duelist. Duelist is back, for those who remember. It's a reprint, but clearly with all different units this time. But basically, innately, they get increased movement speed, so they can dash around the map a little quicker. And then every time they auto, they gain some attack speed, stacking up to 10 times. So for example, even just starting with like Kale plus Gangplank in the early game, you can get up to 50% attack speed in those early fights. And yes, there's a Duelist emblem. So if you want to get some crazy like Duelist Aphelios going or Duelist Samira, there you go. Give it a try. So, all right, that is all the origins and classes. There's a lot of them. Some fun stuff here. Let's talk about the champions. So, at 1 cost, pretty much what you'd expect. 13 champions, all with varying traits. Ashe, backliner, does AD damage, pretty straightforward. Blitzcrank, not using his grab for the first time in TFT. Basically gives himself a shield, prevents some flat damage, or excuse me, some percent damage. So very good tank, can do a lot of tankiness. Not bad for a 1 cost frontline. Galio, some additional frontline. He casts shields himself and a nearby ally, as well as slamming for a little bit of damage. Not too bad, nothing crazy. Gangplank basically shoots his gun, does some extra damage. It doesn't generate gold or anything, but it's still not bad, and with Duelist he can ramp up pretty quick. Plus, like I said, very good in a Supers comp, and you can see why Supers kind of lends itself to Duelist. Kale will be used in the underground. Kale's pretty basic though this time. Nothing crazy, just autos from range, and every 3rd auto is a bigger auto that does a little bit of AoE splash damage. Very little. Nothing crazy, though there is, you know, some fun you can do with her if you find the right comp. Lulu, pretty basic spell, shoots a line. It doesn't go that far, it only goes a few hexes, but it hits the target. The first target it hits, it does some pretty big damage, so good AP user actually. And then after that does less. If you can position her in like the 2nd row, you can hit some of the back line if you want, but that is riskier. So otherwise, just focus on, you know, hitting one big target every once in a while. Lux is a spellcaster, does her kind of like AoE attack. But the thing to note is Lux is not primarily damage this time. It's more support. Lux has that built-in AD reduction. So if you're struggling against AD comps, Lux spell can lower their AD a lot, which is really good. Really good against, say, like I said, those Sure Shot Samiras, something like that. Nasus is not a tank. He's kind of an AD hybrid. You can put tank items on him, but basically he's just going to walk around and bonk people for a little bit of extra damage. There's some fun builds with him that can make him a carry, but they're pretty hard. Otherwise, he's kind of, just some early game strength, nothing too crazy. Poppy is back. This is a reprint. This is the throw the buckler, catch it, get a shield, but it does scale with armor. And so since Poppy is a defender, you can get some unique builds where don't sleep on Poppy, especially early on in PBE. A Poppy 2 with a Bramble can almost one-shot early backliners. So watch out for Poppies. I'm warning you now. Renekton, kind of like Nasus, Renekton is, bit of a bruiser in the sense that he gains some health on cast, and then his autos do bonus damage for the next 8 seconds based on his health. So if you can get like a 3-star Renekton with a ton of health, he can hit pretty hard with that bonus damage. I think he's also one of the more fun users of like scoped weapons. So pretty interesting build there. Silas, if you liked Zac from the last set, Silas is very similar. His heal, he does an AoE attack that heals himself, that scales with AP, and then hits for a % of his health. So nothing too crazy. So just a good front line. Talon's interesting. So it's very weird seeing Talon in the game for the first time, because you're like, he's going to jump to the back line. And then he doesn't, because he's not an assassin. And you're like, oh, that's weird. But what Talon's spell is, so he'll auto, gain some mana, and then his spell is jump to the back line and hit them once really hard. So definitely still threatens backline people as a 1 cost. Isn't going to be your primary carry, really, but can do a lot of work. And the nice thing about this Talon is if he kills them with that spell, he does heal a little bit. So maybe some interesting stuff you can do there. Maybe a Talon 3 with like 3 Renegade, 6 Renegade can do some good. And then Wukong, not a reprint here, actually. This is a new Wukong. Basically, he just does a slight spin attack that gives himself some armor and MR and a little bit of damage around. You're probably going to use this guy mostly as a trait bot. He provides Mecha Prime, giving a lot of that health to the mech, or Defender, giving your team some armor. But who knows? Maybe there's some Wukong builds, especially with the right cases, that you can pull off. We'll see. All right, Annie. We're on the 2 costs now. Annie is a reprint. Gadgeteen, Oxforce, Spellslinger, so 3 traits. Pretty valuable. And this is frontline Annie. This is the tank Annie that shoots a flame burst for short range and shields herself. Monolocked while shielded, of course, so she can't go infinite. But can be a pretty good tank in Spellslinger. Definitely good for early Gadgeteen as well. I think Annie's really versatile this time around. Camille's an interesting one. She's kind of a mix between utility, not really a tank, can do some damage in the right circumstances, but basically does her cone sweep that can do a disarm. Very much like an old Kassadin for those who played back then. And then scales with AD, so in the right circumstances can do some damage, especially if she gets the right admin trait that can scale her AD up in really cool ways. So, yeah. Okay, Draven. Draven is going to be a popular one early on. If you get an early Draven, put these AD items on, use them as an item holder for Samira, play that early mech, you can do some good stuff here, because he's got that built-in ace, and he's a mech. Now, the thing to note is this Draven's not a reprint. This is a new one. His spell is actually his League of Legends ultimate. He throws that wave of axes, and it goes hitting targets for AD damage, less damage each target it hits, but he actually has a cool spell this time, so kind of neat. Ezreal. Ezreal's back to being AP. Nothing too crazy. He shoots a target, slowing their attack speed, and then shoots a second target that does a big AoE pulse for some decent damage. An okay Morello user. Not the best, but if you have some early AP items, he can be a good item holder. He also means you're likely playing underground. So, yeah, he can use him pretty well. Fiora. Fiora is a tank this game. You're going to want to put tank items on Fiora. Her spell is she does the parry, so does a little bit of damage there, and then enters basically a dual state where every auto is healing Fiora. So if you've got like really good tank items on, she can stay alive for a surprisingly long time, stacking that attack speed with Duelist, healing up. Good stuff. Jinx. Jinx is a reprint, but pretty different actually in the sense she used to be like, this is like her sharpshooter build from back in the day, but basically she shoots a rocket. It's an AoE rocket, hits a 1 hex range, stuns everyone inside, but actually has decent base damage. There are 3-star Jinx builds that are pretty scary, actually. Especially if you've been building up like 5 Anima Squad, you've got that HP and AP, get some good items on her. Jinx is surprisingly good, so don't sleep on Jinx. Lee Sin. This is a frontliner. Basically what he does with his spell is he shields himself and then a nearby ally. Does not do much damage here, so don't put damage items on Lee Sin. Kind of a tank. So very good support though. Has that heart, which is good for heart comps, brawler, and supers. So you'll be seeing a lot of 3-star Lee Sin for people playing supers. And speaking of which, the other super here is Malphite. Malphite scales, gives himself a bunch of armor, does a slam, does some damage. There's some fun Malphite builds. I enjoy Malphite as a tank if you're playing supers personally. Rel, this is a reprint from the current live set, just tuned a little differently with different traits, obviously, but gives herself and an ally extra armor and MR, and does a little AoE damage around her. Definitely cool with Star Guardian, an early frontline. Doesn't have Cavalier, but does have Defender, so a bit of a trade-off there. All right, Civilian Sivir. This one's interesting. Sivir throws a pizza as her ult. The pizza does a chunk of AD damage to it hits. Nothing too crazy. But then the pizza breaks up and the slices here heal nearby allies. We got to be careful with Sivir because Sivir in a way could end up a lot like Nami. But basically if you could put some AD items on, Sivir can do some chunk with just a little bit of extra utility. Most of the power is in the damage though, so keeping an eye on Sivir, but kind of like, I love the theme of just like throwing a pizza in and healing allies while damaging enemies. It's fun stuff. Vi, not a reprint, just nothing too crazy here. It's a very useful 2-3 traits for earliest Aegis, so you can get that early Aegis going. Brawler's good. Underground, which means you can play that underground comp. Slams the ground. Pierces armor, so it has some armor penetration built into her kit, which is pretty cool. So, yeah. Yasuo. This Yasuo is very different. This is another new Yasuo. Yes, we have another one. You're going to want AP items on this Yasuo, not AD items. So this Yasuo doesn't have a ton of AD, has attack speed with Duelist, obviously, but when they cast their spell, they will dash to the best spot and shoot out a tornado. And this tornado is really chunky. It's a big AP spell. So you can do some really big AP damage with Yasuo. I think he's a great AP item holder. I don't know if you should 3-star your Yasuos, but really good AP item holder. And then finally, Yuumi. I think this Yuumi is the embodiment of what Yuumi is in League of Legends, in that she's very annoying. She sits on your backline, and she throws out a heart, and she will hit the furthest person she can in range, and hit them for a big chunk of magic damage. So, good AP item holder, and can hit those backliners and do a pretty annoying amount of damage. So, watch out for Yuumi. She's annoying. All right, on to 3 cost. Alistar. Alistar's traits are so good. Alistar's spell's nothing too crazy. Slams the ground. It only hits like a few units. It's not like a big AoE, but also heals himself when he casts. But he's a mascot, Aegis, Oxforce. That Aegis is, again, basically if you think Mystic. So he can be pretty tanky. Oxforce keeps him alive for a while. You'll be seeing a lot of Alistar as kind of a trait bot in your team. Nothing too crazy on the carry side, but very powerful with that Aegis trait. Jax. Jax is very interesting. He's been dominating our playtest lately. I don't know if the tuning is going to go out this way. But basically the way Jax works is Jax doesn't have mana. There is no mana, so you do not want tier items on him or anything like that. Every third attack, though, he jumps and does a bigger attack. That bigger attack does magic damage. So it's like AD, bop with magic damage. Every time he does that, the next one gets bigger and bigger and bigger, stacking up to 10 times. And when I say stacking, this isn't like a minor stacking like Kai'Sa last set. This is like, okay, I was hitting for 200, now I'm hitting for 700. And again, he's a mech, so this scales, with the extra AP from mech. He can do some pretty crazy stuff. So I think we'll see a lot of Jax as one of the fun melee carries. Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa is probably the premier attack speed champion this set. If you're looking like Ginsu's RFC, stuff like that, you probably want to go Kai'Sa, because the way Kai'Sa works is basically she shoots a target, they get a mark, shoots him again, second mark, shoot him a third time, the mark procs, doing a big chunk of magic damage. And so you just want to proc that as much as possible. And then her spell, which I believe is like 70 mana, gives her an additional 60% attack speed for like 6 seconds, but it stacks on itself. So it only lasts 6 seconds, but if you can get like Star Guardian in, or something like a Shojin in, get some extra procs going, you can actually get it sort of recursively stacking on itself, which can make her attack really quickly. Static Shiv, obviously, really fun one there. So yeah, Kaisa go brrr, basically. LeBlanc is basically the best single target mage in the game. LeBlanc basically goes, I'm going to shoot you with 5 rapid bolts. If it kills you, I get an extra bolt and I keep going. And so if you get like a crazy 3-star LeBlanc with a ton of AP items, you can basically do this chain where it's like, you're dead, you're dead, and it just keeps going. So LeBlanc can be pretty fun. Neela is kind of a frontliner. She's an interesting sort of frontliner. She's not that tanky, but her spell is she spins in a whirl and heals herself and nearby allies. So for example, if you're running a bunch of duelists, which are all melee, she can heal all the duelists around and keep them going. Or if you're playing Star Guardian, you can heal that Rel and that Echo and herself and continue to be that extra powerful frontline. So an okay Morello user as well. Not the best, but otherwise some tanky items can do some good on Neela. All right, Riven. I think Riven is the premier 3-cost tank. I think you are going to see Riven in a lot of comps. These traits are amazing. Brawler for 2 Brawler, pair with Sejuani really well. Defender for 2 Defender, pair with Set really well. Anima Squad, you can get that stacking. I think you're going to see a lot of Riven. What Riven does is she casts a shield on herself. She's more of a tank this time. She's not as much damage. But she casts a shield on herself, and then her next 3 autos are enhanced with bonus magic damage. So shield, bop, bop, bop. Again, not really meant to be like an AP carry, but something like Titans, for example, can be really good on Riven if you want to itemize Riven. And again, it's just those traits. Those traits are so good. Senna, an AD carry, basically. Nothing to it. Does AD damage on auto, and then shoots her ult, which does a bunch of AD damage. Pretty good AD carry. If you've got an early Deathblade, think about playing a Senna. Sona. Sona is one of my favorite designs from this set. Sona actually has 3 spells, if you will. Her Q, her W, and her E. So basically what she does is every time she casts, and I think her mana spell is like 40, every time she casts, she shoots 2 waves. The first one is her Q, so she hits 2 targets for some big magic damage. Then her W, she hits 2 targets and heals them. And then her E, 2 targets and stuns them for a second and a half. Repeat, and it just sits there and cycles between them. So really good blue buff user, blue buff AP, and just cycles through those spells. It's kind of fun. And then you've got Heart going, so you're building up that AP. Yeah, pretty cool. Vayne. Vayne is a lot like Kaisa in that they're a premier attack speed carry, but they scale off AD. So if you have AD items as opposed to AP items, you'll want to go Vayne. Really good items here are something like a Ginsu's and then a Deathblade or an IE especially. IE is really good. Because the way Vayne works is basically she has a 40 mana cost, and every 4th auto is basically I shoot a slightly bigger auto that is true damage. So Vayne is really good if your opponents are playing something like a 4 Defender, 3 Aegis. You can tear through with true damage. Now, Vayne's not doing as much true damage as she's done in the past, but still like 30% of her damage is true damage. And again, that true damage scales off AD, so pretty cool. Zoe is probably going to be my favorite champion. If you remember Cassiopeia from Galaxies, which was the like 20 mana, you're poisoned, you're poisoned, you're poisoned, that's Zoe. Zoe has a very low mana cost, so very good blue buff user, and goes, you're poisoned, you're poisoned, you're poisoned. So passes around her sleepy time bubble, which makes them poisoned and makes them take 10% more damage. So tossing around that vulnerability. I'm a big fan of Gunblade Zoe, so expect to see me running that a lot in your games. All right, and then we have our first 3 threats here. So again, as you see here, they're just threats. That's it, no traits. Cho'Gath. Cho'Gath is really weird. I think Cho'Gath's gonna surprise you. He has very high magic resist. So he comes with like a base, I think it's 70 extra magic resist. Really strong. But his spell is he actually shoots a laser out of his mouth. Yes, Cho'Gath shoots a laser. Waves that laser. The laser scales with magic resist. So if you can get a Cho'Gath with like a Gargoyle Stone Plate, and a Dragon Claw, it actually does some pretty chunky damage. So if you're up against a bunch of Spell Slingers and Star Guardians, Cho'Gath's a pretty good tank. Likewise, Rammus is the same thing, but armor. Has a built-in, 60 armor, so very tanky. His spell is he does a flip, lands, and stuns everyone nearby based on his armor. So he can do a bunch of damage. I really like Defender Rammus. If you can pull off Defender Rammus, that's a ton of fun. So yeah, that's fun. And then Vel'Koz. If there's one champion that's more annoying than Yuumi, it's Vel'Koz. Vel'Koz is not an AP carry in the traditional sense. He doesn't do that much damage. But what he does is he has a very low mana cost. And when he reaches full mana, he says, hey, who on the enemy team did the most damage? You're frozen for 2 seconds. And he freezes them and does a little bit of damage to them for 2 seconds. Now, he can't cast on them again for about 6 seconds. But with some good items, he can sit there and freeze the enemies repeatedly. So very annoying. If somebody on the enemy team has a really strong Samira, Vel'Koz is a great counter to lock down that Samira. So, cool. And now we're on to the 4 costs. There's a lot of them this time. Isn't it nice, by the way, to just see the number 4? Another thing to notice here is we have one more 4 costs than normal. So we're at 59 champions, our biggest set ever. All right, Echo. Echo is interesting. I don't think a lot of people expect Echo to be what he is, but Echo is a tank. You are going to want to build Gargoyle Stone Plate and Warmogs on this Echo. Maybe a Morello, but Echo does not do a ton of damage, but he is very tanky. He's going to roll around. Every time he casts, he's going to taunt, and he's going to shield himself, and just do a tiny bit of damage, but very, very tanky. So Echo is really good frontline. Probably the best frontliner as far as pure survivability goes. Maybe not utility, but survivability. And again, also has that Aegis trait, which is very good in the late game to get that magic resist going for your team. So expect to see a lot of Echo. All right, Misfortune. If you remember 5-cost Misfortune with the bullet time, this is the same thing. The big difference here, though, is the bullets do stop on the first thing they hit. So you can't just freely delete people's backlines. You've got to get through the front line first. But as an Anima Squad ace, this Misfortune can get a lot of power. So a lot of AP. You're going to want things like Shojin, Jeweled Gauntlet, Deathcap, and then you're going to mow down people's front line and then get to their back line, getting those ace procs, getting a ton of damage. So yeah, fun times. Samira, I've talked about a bit already, but Samira is probably the best 1v1 AD carry also because her spell, she basically juggles them in the air for 1.5 seconds. So if you've got a mech you need to take down, for example, that doesn't have, CC immunity, Samira can just juggle them in the air and do a bunch of damage. And then those bullets will actually bounce off and hit nearby targets also. So again, very good AD user. The one thing to note though is Samira is one of the few AD users you don't want Ginsu's on because she can't really attack during her spell and her spell's kind of long. You just want pure AD. So stuff like Deathblade, Hurricane, IE are really what you're looking at for something like Samira. All right. Sejuani. Sejuani's back. This is the Sejuani that you can expect to see in a lot of comps. This is basically the premier utility frontline champion. She's not going to be the tankiest, but that big AoE CC with a Morello, it's back. Hits the whole team pretty much, except for some corners. Sejuani's back. Traits aren't the best. You don't get Defender or Aegis. You do get Brawler, which is okay, but you don't need the traits. You'll be playing traitless Sejuani's. Sejuani's good. Set. Set's pretty tanky by himself. He's got Defender, but there's also some fun mech builds with Set. He's got one of the highest base ADs in the game, which means he's scaling really well off that Mecha Prime. And then his spell is he charges up a punch, gets a shield, and then the longer he charges, the bigger it hits. He can start wiping people pretty hard. Set's one of those champions to keep an eye on because if you get the right set with the right items, really hard to kill. Soraka. The thing to note about Soraka, I think a lot of you expect Soraka to heal. Soraka's not a healer this time. Soraka's damage. This is a carry. It's a blue buff carry. It's only 40 mana. Basically, she rains down sort of the star call that does damage. Every third cast is an enhanced one that will hit multiple targets. So she's just sitting there spamming, hitting people with her spell, doing tons of magic damage. And again, stacking with Heart, because she's also one of the best Heart stackers. There's also some really cool admin builds with her. So a premier quick AP carry. Speaking of AP carries, we've got one more here, Talia. Talia shoots her wall. It does a little bit of damage, and then the wall explodes and does a lot more damage. And if you've got 7 Star Guardian in, Talia's casting a lot. Talia is my favorite of the 4-cost AP carries, but she does require traits. But again, with Star Guardian Spellslinger, you can get a lot of power on that Talia. Viego, if you remember Darius with the dunk, Viego's that, but AoE. So Viego's spell is simply that he jumps up, slams, does a big AoE hit, hitting the center for a bunch of damage and AoE around. If it kills anyone, he resets and does a little bit less damage. So he can sit there and like slam, slam, slam. Really fun melee AP carry. Time to talk about an AD carry, Zed. Zed, basically, every time he casts, he'll kind of like move to a different spot and then enter a state where every third auto he'll spin. Kind of like a blender, if you will. The blender Nocturne, but more Zed. So really good with Duelist, really good with Hacker to jump on the back line. Also has insane base stats, so scales really well. I think Edge of Night is going to be a premier item on this guy. So Edge of Night, Zed with like Deathblade IE. But yeah, Zed's pretty fun. And then we're on to the threats. Aurelion Soul is a threat. If you don't have a Morello or Sunfire, get yourself an Aurelion Soul. He summons 3 meteors down that hit and apply burn. So if you need anti-heal, good. Or if you need like a flexible AP carry and you didn't like the other ones you hit, Aurelion Soul's really good for those AP items. If you have a bunch of AD items lying around, Belveth is your threat maybe you want to play. So Belveth is 2 range, really goes well with RFC. If you've got RFC on Belveth, it makes her even better. So definitely consider that. But then basically what she does is she moves around and her spell's only 20 mana. So she's doing this constantly. She dashes and then goes slap, 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 and gains more attack speed. Does it again, even more attack speed. Does it again, even more. And so she ramps up and just does a ton of slapping and a ton of power. And then finally, Zac. Zac is my favorite of the 4-cost tanks. Zac doesn't actually do a whole lot. His spell's not that great. It just kind of jumps up and does a tiny bit of damage. But he has really high base HP. I think it's like 1200 or something. But what's even cooler is when Zac dies, he splits into 2 copies, each with 40% of his health. So if you've got like a 3000 health Zac, you just got 2, 1400 health Zacs in addition. Really high effective health. Also really good for tossing in with Syndra. So yeah, Zac is one of my favorites. I think you're going to see a lot of Zac in in-game states. And then finally we have the 5 costs. There are 8 5 costs as usual. Let's go over them. The first one is Aphelios. Like I said, I think you're going to see a lot of Aphelios with that 2 sure shot build. Oxforce he can play, maybe just 2-piece. You don't really need more than that. But he's unique in that he gets to choose which weapon he equips. Duskwave, Blinding Eclipse, and Onslaught. I refer to them as blue, purple, and red. There's probably better terms, and I'm colorblind, so bear with me here. The blue one here is basically your backline access. If you want to snipe the backline, pick the blue one. It does a wave of damage, locks on to like 4 or 5 targets, including backliners, and then snipes them doing some damage. Pretty chunky damage too. So, and scales with AD as you can see here. But yeah, I consider this one the backline access. Purple, this is the best one if you don't have any items for Aphelios. So let's say you're playing Samira carry and Aphelios support. I think this is the one you play because basically this has a stun. It's much less damage, so the damage goes down, but he shoots a big, spotlight towards the largest group of enemies and stuns them for 1.5 seconds. So this turns Aphelios into utility. And then finally the red gun. This one is the highest damage, but it will get you stuck on frontliners. This is, if you have a Last Whisper though, this is my favorite one. This is the one I use to burn through their frontliners so I can get to the back line. But basically he shoots a bunch of attacks, hitting 2 targets. If they die, it'll move on to the next target. But yeah, this is the highest DPS one. No backline access, burns tanks. So consider which one's right for you. And yeah, that's our first champ with 3 spells that you get to pick from. So cool. Janna is a civilian forecaster spellslinger. Very flexible champion, can be played in a lot of comps. Her spell is pretty utility based. Shoots off a tornado. It's kind of a new tornado, actually. I think you'll like the artifact our team came up with. Knocks up the enemies nearby, stunning them for 1.5 seconds, and deals a little bit of magic damage. Good Morello user also. But really, her twist here is forecaster. And so you can kind of see it in the picture there, but let me give you a clearer picture. Every game, there's a different weather. So in this picture, the weather is windy. And anyone near Janna gets the effect of the weather. And just like our old Mirage nub, now it's a weather nub, so you can check the weather at the start of the game. But each effect is different. So windy is going to give those nearby allies increase attack damage and ability power every 5 seconds. So it's a pretty chunky amount too. And then Sunny is giving them a big health shield for 10 seconds. Janna 2 gives anyone around 600 health. That's like bruiser levels of health. So do not sleep on how ridiculously strong this is. And then Rainy is my least favorite, but basically just says at the start of combat, grant starting mana to nearby allies. So if you're playing an AP comp and it's raining, consider Janna to get that earlier cast going. Really good for the big casters. I actually like Janna Mordekaiser as well, which we'll talk about, but yeah, that's a cool one. All right, Leona. Did you miss Lee Sin and Urgot from the old days? Well, Leona's here to mess with your day. So the way Leona works is it's only an 80 mana spell, so she'll cast quite a bit. But let's say I'm fighting the enemy, I don't know, tanky Echo we talked about. When she casts, she raises up her sword, and a frickin' orbital laser comes down on that Echo. Everyone around the Echo is going to be taking a little bit of magic damage. Nothing too crazy. The Echo is going to be taking massive true damage per second. And so eventually, and this channels until Echo dies or Leona dies. So Leona basically says, all right, you, orbital laser, you're going to eventually die. Really good for taking down mechs. Really good for taking down super tanks. But she does have to stay alive. So you're going to want to give her some tanky items. I personally like something like, 2 tank items and then Edge of Night to drop aggro just in case she gets low. There's also some really fun RFC builds with Leona where you just stay safe and kill people from the distance. But yeah, Leona's pretty crazy, pretty fun. So give that a try. Mordekaiser. Mordekaiser is our big boom caster of the set. Basically the way it works is when Mordekaiser casts a spell, you'll notice it's a really cool effect. But he transports everyone into the project arena, if you will, for 4 seconds, during which their magic resist is shredded. So even if you're running an itemless Mordekaiser, you're still getting the magic resist shred for the team. Then he summons a giant building and drops it on them. And the giant building hits really hard. And he's an ace. So if it drops them to 10% or lower, it kills them. So yeah, Mordekaiser. Very, very cool champion. Hits really, really hard. I expect you'll see a lot of fun Mordekaiser builds in the end game, dropping buildings on people. So he's fun. Nunu. Did you miss set 2 Singed? Nunu's kind of similar. He pushes around a snowball. But one of the twists here I really like is that every second he's generating 30 mana, in addition to the mana he's taking from taking damage. And every time he reaches 90 mana, he makes the snowball bigger and bigger and bigger. And as the snowball gets bigger, he also moves a little quicker too. And so that snowball starts doing more and more and more damage. And by the end, you can be pushing around this snowball that's proccing for 600-700 damage. So really fun champion. Yeah, enjoy Nunu. I really like Nunu. He's really fun. Obviously a good Morello user, but not just Morello. You can go full tank. I think he works both with tank and AP items if you can pull it off. So really interesting champion if you can get him. All right, Syndra. Now, the one thing to know about Syndra you got to be careful with is Syndra is 3 range. That is intentional. We're not going to buff her to 4 range, so do consider that. But the way Syndra works is she picks a unit on her bench, turns them into an orb, throws them into combat, and now they're in combat. They're helping now. So, for example, if you have a 2-star Zac on your bench, Syndra picks them up, throws them in, and now you have an extra 2-star Zac. So Syndra can summon a lot of extra units. It's really cool. For those who remember Galaxies, this is similar to Thresh. But yeah, and so it doesn't do much damage. She's not really a damage dealer. If she's 2-star, she'll also give them a pretty chunky shield, which is nice. But yeah, this is really cool. Your first cast kind of comes free. She's got a big mana cost. But like if you're running 7 Star Guardian with Syndra, whew, every 90 mana, you're chucking in new things. Pretty cool. I like Syndra a lot, and I like Syndra summoning threats. So consider that. All right, Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks is a weird champion. At the start of combat, and for the rest of combat, he goes like this. And he stands there, like a scarecrow, doing nothing. During this state, anytime, with his corrupted trait, anytime an ally dies, he absorbs their soul, gaining 20 ability power. Cool. So if he's the last one alive, for example, let's say you backline him and 8 allies die, he has 160 extra ability power just from his trait. Then what he does is when he reaches 60% health, he drops aggro, comes alive, and ults. Instantly ults. It's his big AoE ult. It fears nearby enemies and drains the life out of them. Just it says life drain. It doesn't actually drain. We should change the wording on that. But basically, he does a bunch of magic damage. Really cool. It lasts for 5 seconds. Then he can cast again. But yeah, so like I really like this guy with like, you know, Jeweled Gauntlet, Jeweled Gauntlet BT +1. And he can just come in, do a bunch of damage, and clean up fights. Really good way to end fights. Really good, like, let's say you have a solid level 8 comp. Level to 9, throw in a Fiddlesticks. Works pretty well. So, I really like this champion. I think we're going to see a lot of Fiddles cleaning up fights that's going to frustrate some people. But we'll see. That's what Fiddle does. But you can also just throw him on the front line. And as soon as he takes damage, he'll do that AoE CC for you. So there are a bunch of good options here. You don't have to play him as that 1v9 at the end. And then finally, Urgot. Urgot's an interesting champion. He is one of the best AD champions in the game. For those who remember his spell from Gizmos and Gadgets, that's passive now. He just attacks really, really fast. Now, the tooltip here says that attack speed improves his number of shots. It doesn't. We have to clean up this tooltip, so bear with me. But he's very good with AD items. You want to put, like, Deathblade, Hurricane, IE on this guy, and you're going to do a ton of damage. But what's really interesting, though, is his spell is not an AD scale. What it does is it summons these 2 tidal waves that come in, and they stun the enemy for 1.25 seconds. Not too bad. So it's an AD carry with a built-in AoE stun. Cool. What's interesting, though, is every target he hits has a 12% chance to drudge up a treasure chest. That chance scales with AP. So if you wanted to go an AP build, it wouldn't increase the damage, but it would increase the number of treasure chests you get. So hypothetically, let's say you get like an early level 7 Urgot, throw on some AP items, you can drudge up treasure chests. And those treasure chests are usually pretty chunky amount of gold or even items. So it's really interesting in that he can do a lot of things, right? He can be an AD carry, he can be a CC bot, and he can be like a gold farmer. So kind of interesting. And again, he's a threat, so put him in any trait, you know. So cool. That is every champion. But there's more. What else is going on with this set? All right, so some mechanic updates. This one's a big one. You got to pay attention. This is a big one. Physical spells now work like magic spells. What that means is they can no longer be dodged or missed or anything like that. So no more of like my big physical bite being dodged or anything like that. They can't miss. They're just like magic spells. But that also means they can't crit by default. You need something that allows your spells to crit, like a Jeweled Gauntlet. So that's going to be the case for all physical champions. This means IE is going to be very high demand, for example, and we'll talk about that a little later. But yeah, your physical spells will not crit without help. Okay? Next thing to note, Grievous Wounds has been lowered from 50% to 33%. So it's not as much of a hard counter. You're not going to feel like you absolutely need it, but it will still help. And in addition, healing sources have also been slightly reduced. So for example, Bloodthirster went from 25% to 20% Omnivamp. But Grievous Wounds won't counter it as hard. So consider that. This one's another big one, which we're going to talk about in depth. Champion base power is up across the board. So you're going to see champions scale a little bit more per star level and be a little stronger. But item power has gone down a bit. Not a crazy amount, but a bit. So this means the difference between a 0 item and a 3 item champion isn't going to be as insane as it was before. You're still going to notice the power spike, but it's not going to be as drastic. Finally, stage 4, 7, 5, 7, and 6, 7 have been replaced with boss battles. Now, these boss battles aren't hard. They're still loot pinatas, but they have new types of drops, including component and full item anvils. You can see here, that's a full item anvil pictured. It works very much like a Tome of Traits. You sell it, and then it procs, and you get an armory here of 5 choices. Pick one you like. This will really help make sure at the end game you're not playing an AP build and then you get a Deathblade while your opponent gets a Shroud. No more of that BS. Should help some of the competitive integrity at the end of the game. So, all right, hero augments. There are 118 new augments this set called hero augments. There are 2 for each champion. The way it works is either 2-1, 3-2, or 4-2. Only once, never again, always the same for every player. You'll be presented with a hero augment instead of a normal augment. So for example, in this game, in this screenshot, at 2-1, we were presented with some hero augments. In the early game, it'll be low-cost champions. In the late game, it'll be high-cost champions, okay? So for example, in this game, it was a 1-cost champion, Silas, and 2 2-cost champions, Yuumi and Annie for me. Every player gets the same cost. So every player in this lobby got a 1-cost and 2 2-costs. Okay. Now from here, there are every champion has 2 augments. One is one that really makes them like a exciting carry. So for example, Kingslayer here is Silas's hero augment. It gives you a Silas, his ability does 50% more damage, and restores 20% more of his health. Okay, not bad. The other type is support. And for those of you that really like flexing in the early game, you're probably going to lean more towards the support ones. Yuumi is a great example of a support one. Gain a Yuumi. When you field her, your team gains 20% attack speed and zooms towards their targets. That's it. So you can play, an AD Samira comp with zoomies and Yuumi. Cool, you're good to go. So consider the support augment. The other example here is Annie's support augment. Gain an Annie. When you field her, your team gains 20 ability power, tripled when they're below 50% health. So again, just gives your team AP. Play around a generic AP comp. You can flex around. So again, every champion has 2. Be on the lookout. We also guarantee you always get at least 1 support one. So you're never going to get 3 carries and feel like you're hard locked. But yeah, there's 118 new ones to explore. I'm going to make it a goal of mine to try to win with every single one. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, give them a try. Let us know what you think. Speaking of which, we still have normal augments for the rest of the game. There are 180 of them, more than 180 of them. But I do want to cover 2 big changes to the augment system. The first is that all the new traits have their, their hearts, their souls, their crowns, emblems, things like that you'd come to expect. But other than that, there are no new trait-specific augments. So you're not going to see anything like a Scorch or a Penitence or anything like that. They're all generic augments, other than those heart souls and things like that. So this should lead to less like traits needing specific high rolls to win, and more, hey, just you need to get, augments that work well with your comp, that kind of thing. And then the other big thing to note here is that there aren't any new augments. We didn't, we made 118 new hero augments. We didn't make any new base augments. Some have gone and some have come back. For example, makeshift armor's back. But other than that, don't expect a ton of innovation in this space. That all went into the hero augment space. So still some classic favorites though. And they obviously play differently with different champions and things like that. So give them a try. Here's kind of the distribution you can expect and the way it works. So you can see basically it's like 30% chance your first augment will be hero, 30% chance your second, 30% chance your third. We did lower prismatic across the board, Mostly because third hero can sometimes feel like a prismatic game since it can give you 4 and 5 costs. But just something to think about. And then you can see basically by default, like on 3-2, you're very likely to get 2 cost champions, but they may upgrade to 3 cost and things like that. So, you know, on 3-2, you could get 2-2-2, or in a very rare case, there could be a game where you get 4-4-4. Now remember, it's the same for every player, so don't panic. But basically, this is to show all the different kind of combinations of augments that can appear. So again, randomly making one up here. Our first augment could be gold. Our second augment could be a hero prismatic that was a 2 cost and 2 3 costs. And then our third one could be silver. So that could be a game that could happen. Take a look here. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go over every single hero augment and augment. There are websites you can look up if you're interested. It's not a good use of time to sit here and read 290 augments. But augments, there's a lot of them. They're sticking around. Should be a big joy. And with the hero augments, a lot of new combinations. All right, last thing to really majorly talk about here, item updates. There's some big ones here, okay? So pay attention. First thing, sword has changed. It is not 10 flat AD. It is 10% AD. One of the weirdest, most unintuitive things about TFT was that AD users didn't want more AD. If you had really high AD, you didn't want a Deathblade. That's weird. It's unintuitive. Swords now make AD users better. So if you have a 1.0 attack speed and 30 AD, swords are bad. If you have a 0.5% attack speed and 400 AD, swords are great. So consider that. Second big change, glove. Glove is now 20% critical strike chance and no dodge. Dodge is gone. Woohoo! No more random dodges. This has some impactful changes. So I'm going to try to go fast. We're going to go over every item, and I'm just going to highlight the changes. Ready? Zephyr comes with some base attack speed, so you don't feel as bad locking it in early. You can give your champion some attack speed. Dragon Claw, less magic resist, but much more healing. The healing has gone up a lot. So if you have to slam an early Dragon Claw, it's actually really good to regenerate 4% max health. It's pretty good. All right, Hextech Gunblade, a little bit of a nerf from the healing thing like we talked about. Deathblade is now 60% AD damage. So again, if you're an AD champion, like a sure shot champion, this is your item. It's a good item. Now, one thing to note is this is percent AD, and as you saw, sure shot is percent AD. So these are going to work together, but it's still all percent based. There's no like crazy ways to multiply it or anything like that. Giant Slayer now gives AD and AP instead of percent damage up front, but then you get the bonus damage if they're over the 1900 health. So basically it's just a flex AD and AP item like it always was. It's just a little more upfront about it. Shojin has changed. Shojin is now 20 ability power, so it's that AP up front, and then every third attack restores 10 mana. So it's a little less mana regen than before, but at least it comes in increments in 10 and doesn't get wasted nearly as much. Okay, Infinity Edge. This is one of the biggest changes. Infinity Edge now says your abilities can crit. So you're going to want Infinity Edge a lot if you want your abilities to crit. It grants 15% AD, and, or excuse me, 25% total AD and 35% bonus crit strike. So it's very good. But one of the big twists here is that IEJG is no longer a good combo. So if you're used to building IEJG, stop it. It's not a good combo anymore, okay? Because you're wasting a lot of that power budget from the damage from an ability can critical strike. If you need an AD crit item, you get IE. You'll see later, JG is basically the same thing, but AP. Zeke's slight nerf, down to 20%. Edge of Night, slight nerf, nothing crazy. Rabadon's Death Cap, down to 60 AP, still good. It's basically the AP version of Deathblade. Ginsu's Rage Blades, down to 4%. Again, item power down across the board. Bloodthirster, down to 20% Omnivamp for the heal. Jeweled Gauntlet, same thing as I mentioned here. This is the AP version of the crit thing, but again, don't pair them. Very good on AP users, though. Archangel Staff, just a little bit less base AP, still stacks 20 per. Can end up being better than Death Cap over time. Good item. Locket hasn't changed at all. Locket's still great. RFC, it still has the attacks don't miss. I just didn't put it there. but basically just a little less attack speed. Otherwise, still a very good item. Ionic Spark didn't change at all. It's the exact same item. Static Shiv has changed here. Static Shiv used to give more attack speed. This now gives AP. Okay, so this is meant to be on AP users. So if you have an AP user that needs Shred, give them a Static Shiv. Don't be afraid to give them a Static Shiv. The flat damage has gone down, but now it's 20 AP, 10% attack speed, 15 starting mana, and that Shred. So don't be afraid to build a Static Shiv on your AP user. Last Whisper, one of the big changes here is that, and the iconography might be a little wrong, we got to fix that, but basically it's AD now instead of attack speed. So this is a good AD item. Definitely put it on your AD user. Other than that, it's still good. Zerat Portal hasn't changed. I didn't include the taunt line here. It's still there. Zerat Portal just hasn't changed. It's the same item. Titan's Resolve, there's a bug here where it says 0.02, but basically it hasn't changed other than it's percent AD. So, cool. Thieves Gloves hasn't changed other than it's crit, no dodge. Cool. Runon's Hurricane, the bolts have gone down a bit. Again, we're lowering attack damage, or lowering items across the board. But again, still a very good AD item. Hand of Justice basically hasn't changed other than it's percent AD. Still a good item. Okay, here's a big one. Belt plus Glove is no longer Banshee's Claw. It is a new item called Guard Breaker. This is a very good item in the sense that it is AD and AP, but also crit chance. So if, for example, let's say you build a Jeweled Gauntlet and you're trying to get up to that 100% crit rate, Guard Breaker is a great item to build. In addition, what happens is if you damage a shielded enemy, you get a buff for 3 seconds that increases your damage by 25%. So if you're looking for an anti-shield item, Guard Breaker is a great new choice. So this is now an item that you should be happy to get in the early game now. No one really liked building Banshee's Claw in the early game. So this gives you another option. So hopefully that should be exciting. Shroud. Big change here is that it now grants 250 bonus health. So you might want to consider who you're putting the Shroud on. Quicksilver. The CC immunity has gone back down to 10 seconds, but it's now a lot of attack speed. You should look at Quicksilver as an attack speed item that you're happy to give. So really good on like a Kaisa. Just a ton of attack speed. Redemption actually kind of got buffed. Now that there aren't dragons with tons and tons of health, we can buff it back to where it was. Chalice got a bit of a nerf. Sort of the same power down. Blue buff, quite a bit different. But basically it's still good on low mana users. Nothing's changed there. So if you have a 40 mana cost or a 20 mana cost, blue buff is still the item for you. Basically, it grants a little bit of AP, so you're still going to get that AP. It reduces the holder's maximum mana by 10. So, okay, cool. So a 40 mana user becomes a 30 mana user. Then if you get a takedown within 3 seconds of casting, you get an extra 10 mana. So it can allow you to spam cast and have that spam cast fantasy, but it's not quite as warping as it was before. So let us know what you think of that one. Give it a try. I know it's going to be very good with Zoe. So, yeah. Protector's Vow got changed a little bit. It no longer buffs your team. It only buffs the wearer, but it buffs the wearer more. This is a very good item if you want to cast quickly. So, for example, 4-cost Sejuani, Protector's Vow, great item. But yeah, otherwise, don't expect to just like slam this and make your team better. Gargoyle Stoneplate, tiny nerf. Warmogs, nothing changed. Sunfire, little less bonus health, otherwise nothing changed. Bramble Vest, little less armor, otherwise nothing changed. And that's it. Double Up. There's a new feature in Double Up. The assist armories have been changed into gift armories. There's much more varied loot now. There's always 3 options. 2 of the options will cost gold and 1 will always be free. Gifts that cost gold are more varied and exciting. There are different gift options in the early and late games. For example, you might get a tier 5 champion for 7 gold, a random radiant item, a tactician's crown. So definitely let us know if you're going to play some Double Up. Let us know what you think of this new feature. Team's been working really hard on this. So should be a new thing for Double Up players, showing you that we're still working on Double Up, trying to improve it and make that gift armory a little more exciting there. So all players will see the same style of gift armory, though not the same offerings. And yeah, Cool stuff. And so we have made it to the end. It only took 80 minutes. It was a long one, but there's a lot going on this set. Not to mention there's all these new cosmetics. This is just a taste of them. You know, obviously Star Guardian Lux is going to be a big hit. I'm a big fan of the Baron. If you didn't see it at the start of the presentation, just a lot of cool stuff. A lot of heart and soul went into the team and this game and this cosmetics and everything like that. So we're hoping you enjoy. I think there's something for everyone here. There's fun verticals like Star Guardian. The end game can be insanely flex and incredibly skill intensive. The hero augments make a bunch of new combinations. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So, all right. Hopefully this was entertaining and useful. Today is Monday if you're watching this the day it came out. Tomorrow is PBE, and then we're off. The other crazy thing to note is it's a 3-week PBE because of the North American Thanksgiving holiday. So we'll be on PBE a little longer. Hopefully that means we can squash a few more bugs and get the balance a little bit better for launch even. And yeah, that's it. All right. Hope you're excited. On behalf of the entire TFT team that worked their collective butts off, we hope you guys are excited as we are. It's another set. It's going to be a blast. I can't wait. All right. That's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.